Well, when I reflect back on what we did in the Newton days, there are three pieces of technology that I think most people forget about. They remember the handwriting recognition, but I think there are three far more important contributions that Newton made. The first is the processor. We started with this processor codenamed Hobbit from AT&T, and it was too expensive and too hot and used too much power. And in classic Apple style, we said, well, we're going to have to invent our own. And we partnered with a company in the UK called Acorn and a semiconductor fab in Silicon Valley called VLSI to create a chip that became the ARM processor. And that processor is what shipped with the Newton. Was co-created by Apple. There were members of the Newton team, I remember, were working on designing the memory management unit of the processor, that tight integration of hardware and software that Apple's so good at. And that company and that processor is now in most smartphones around the world. So the legacy of that Newton chip, I think, is profound. And it's in most of the smartphones in people's pockets around the globe.
There's a parallel today, too, with Apple creating their own.
It was a foreshadowing, exactly, of what Apple has now done with the A4, A5 custom ASICs. Exactly.
Yeah. Now they're being successful. Lets you know it's kind of the right direction, I think.
And Apple owned, I think, over 40% of ARM when we did that Newton deal, and so the profits on that investment far exceed any losses on the Newton project overall, I suspect. So it was a very good investment for Apple.
Absolutely.
Second thing I remember is the data architecture of the Newton. So this is a technology that mainstream computing still has not caught up to over 20 years later. The Newton had something we called the data soup, or these data frame stores, to use a more technical term. And it was a way for applications to define what kind of data they needed to store in a way that was shared with other applications, including the built-in applications on your Newton. So your Newton came with a calendar and an address book, but you could install applications that would add new fields and new capabilities to your address book. And that is something that today desktop computers and laptops cannot do. And smartphones can barely do today, right? We see applications that can access your photos or access your contacts, but they can't really extend them in a dynamic way. And that's something that the Newton operating system pioneered with the frame store.
Cool.
You ready for number 3? Last but not least, I think the work that we did on the Newton team around something we called intelligent assistance was really ahead of its time. And if you look at some of the biggest consumer technology trends today, they're around what today we're calling machine learning and artificial intelligence, but really this is what the Newton did, built in. It would take your handwriting, understand the context of your calendar, your address book, your email, and allow you to tap the assist button and get help setting up a meeting or faxing a document or sending an email. And that's exactly what Siri and Alexa and Cortana are trying to do today with voice. So Newton had the input wrong, had handwriting as the input, but it had the intelligent assistance correct, and I think was way ahead of its time on that front. Well, I joined Apple in 1989, and I was recruited to be an engineering team lead because I was a programmer on the East Coast specializing in something called Mac App, which was an object-oriented programming framework at a time when object-oriented programming was not yet mainstream at all. And Apple was looking for someone to help build this very, very large software project, over 4 million lines of code built on top of this framework. That's what got me to Apple. And I moved from New York City out to Cupertino. I was actually initially working in San Jose. Cupertino was full, and I was in a building in downtown San Jose that was an overflow building for Apple. And I had an amazing team, and we were building this product internally. It was called Mac DSS, stood for Decision Support System. But one of the things that I found is that I wasn't content just sitting in a cubicle writing code. I was out evangelizing the product to other groups because it was designed to help the different sales teams and product teams run the business at Apple, and building the training manual and running the training sessions. And so I was, you might say, a very extroverted engineer. And in doing so, I got recruited by this research group called the Advanced Products Group. And they said, hey, James, we're looking for a product manager that has a technical background. And I said, product manager, what is that? You know, I was fresh off the boat from the East Coast, and I quickly learned how Apple and Microsoft and other companies had really invented this role that we take for granted now, the product manager or the program manager, to work in between marketing and customers on one end and software and hardware engineers on the other end, to help translate those two different worlds and speak those two languages. And I was recruited by an Apple marketing exec named Michael Chow, who's now back at Apple running iPad marketing. And Michael was the first marketing person to join this top secret research group called the Advanced Products Group. And that group is what became the Newton Group.
Leading up to the launch of Newton, I understand there were some difficult days, and then how did you feel when you finally launched it?
Oh, it's a long time ago. How did I feel? I mean, I felt like Newton had multiple launches, to be honest. I mean, we had the kind of announcement of Newton and the category with John Scully at CES in 1992, I think. And I remember sitting with John and Michael and John were debating what this new category of devices was going to be called. And we had 2 or 3 candidates, and it was literally 2 minutes before the keynote speech that John Scully was scheduled to deliver. And he turned to Michael Chow and he said, I like personal digital assistant. Let's go with PDA. And that was the moment that term PDA was coined.
And that became the whole category.
And that became the category. And so that was kind of the first hill on the emotional roller coaster that is Newton. And that was very exciting, but also terrifying, because Newton started as a very advanced stack of research. I used to describe the Newton project as stacking risk. We would take an entirely new RISC processor that was unbuilt and unproven, and then we would add an entirely new multi-threaded operating system that wasn't yet built and unproven, and then we would add an entirely new programming language that was only partially built, and then we would add diffuse infrared communications, which had never been done before, and on and on and on. And from an engineering point of view, that's incredibly exciting, but from a business point of view, it's completely crazy, because you're going from linear risk to n-squared risk in terms of what could go wrong with this product. So when we pre-announced the product and the category, that really started a stopwatch for the team in terms of how we actually bring it to market. And then we did the actual Newton announcement at an event in Chicago, and we weren't yet shipping the product, but it was much further along with working product. And then from there were many more sleepless nights leading up to Macworld Boston 1993, when we actually shipped the first Newton message pad.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And what about the reception of the message pad from the public? Because from what I understand, it was initially quite positive. Everybody was very excited.
Yeah.
But it built expectations up very high.
Yeah, I think it was a great lesson learned that the longer you go between announcing a brilliant concept to actually shipping the first iteration, which is always going to be less than your full vision, right? It takes a long time to iterate on any software or hardware, but those expectations just built and built and built. And by the time we shipped the first product, it was more expensive than we thought. It was heavier than we thought. The battery life was shorter than we thought. The handwriting recognition wasn't quite as good as we thought. All of those forces of gravity, if you'll excuse the pun, I think hurt us in that expectations were really high. The Apple fan culture loved the product. People lined up to buy it when it was released. Developers lined up to build software for it, and our tools were fairly primitive, and third-party developers did amazing things to push the envelope. But I think that was all against the current of consumer disappointment around the fact that this $800 device couldn't do what a laptop computer could do. It didn't run Lotus 123. It didn't run WordPerfect. It didn't synchronize well with your MS-DOS desktop computer, which most of the world used at the time that Newton was launched. And so all of those things were a fast-moving current that we were swimming against. The second iteration of Newton is where the product became really good. And the operating system got better, the hardware got better, the battery life got better. So as a team, I think we did amazing work. For me personally, I was in charge of product marketing for the operating system, the developer tools, and the desktop connectivity tools. And it was a very painful experience for me because 90% of my target customer used an MS-DOS or a Windows PC. And I was trying unsuccessfully to hire Windows engineers to build those Windows tools to make Newton work well with the PC. It was ultimately why I left Apple in 1995, as I just felt like Apple was in denial about the fact that most of the world, certainly the business world, was using a PC, and we were trying to sell Newton as a business communications and productivity tool, but the company was just unwilling to kind of let us build what it took to make the Newton work well with the PC.
Okay. So were you sad when you heard that they canceled it?
Oh, I was very sad. Yeah. Yeah, I felt like, it was a missed opportunity because Microsoft taught us that products really don't become usable until version 3. You could certainly say that about Windows, and Newton never got permission to get past version 2. I don't think you can argue that it set Apple back, given the unbelievable lead that Apple has taken in smartphones and tablets. I think it reset Apple, and maybe there's pros and cons to that, but certainly one of the pros is that it reset Apple to create what I call the multi-touch era, to go from the stylus as the input device, which is what Newton used, to the finger and the fingers as the input device, which is really what ushered in the iPhone and the iPad. I still like to call Newton the iPhone Alpha. I feel like we were part of that early front lines, miniaturizing a lot of the hardware and creating a new paradigm of software that wasn't a desktop UI that really set the table for the iPhone.
Do you want to talk about Doonesbury?
Sure.
Was that actually as devastating as it's been made out to be in Newton circles?
I don't think so. Okay. I think the Doonesbury cartoons actually capture a moment in time really well, but the amount of attention that the Doonesbury parody of the Newton created was actually not that much. Okay. Why I think it's relevant is that it was just a representation of the general consumer malaise that was building around the product, that, hey, it's not a business tool, it doesn't run my spreadsheets, and it's also, occasionally screwing up on my handwriting. What am I supposed to do with this? What exactly is this product for? And again, it was a product that started as research technology. It's what I call technology in search of a market. The job that Michael and Steve Capps and I had was how do we, and a whole bunch of other smart people, how do we take all this technology and kind of ship it? But we didn't start with a really clear customer need, like how do we take your calendar and your contacts from your PC and synchronize them into your pocket? And that's what a product called the Palm Pilot did really well. And I think the Palm Pilot really picked up where the message pad failed and created a simpler but much more focused product that did one thing and did one thing really well. I think the marketing team, as one of the people on that team, I think we knew what Newton could be. And we had been living in the future for so long, living with the best and brightest researchers at Apple, that we misjudged the distance from the present to the future. You know, the idea of beaming is something that you still cannot do today. I can't easily send my business card to you, right, from our smartphones, but that's something that Newton was doing back in 1993. Right? And the other wireless technology we were working on in the labs was even more, futuristic. So we were so in love with the future, and we so saw these post-PC device use cases, doctors and nurses carrying around a dedicated tablet, industrial uses, consumer uses. A lot of that coming back from the John Sculley Knowledge Navigator video. That's a piece of Apple history that was part of the spark, I believe, for the Newton project. But when you live in the future, you also need a roadmap to get there, and I think that's where maybe we tripped up a little bit.
The Knowledge Navigator video, is that a source of inspiration?
Absolutely. I think the Knowledge Navigator video was a source of inspiration, but it was also a mirage. Because it's now better understood in 2017 than it was back then how seductive a well-produced video can be. I mean, we now have platforms like Kickstarter and Indiegogo that create millions of dollars of pre-orders just based on a seductive video. So Knowledge Navigator was the very first Kickstarter video.
After the launch, how was developer morale? Were the developers buoyed on, or were they affected by the negative reception? That's
a great question. I mean, it's a better question probably for someone on the engineering side of the house. I was kind of this babble fish, in between engineering and sales and marketing. And so from my vantage point, I would say morale had its ups and downs across the whole team, including the engineering team. We had some really amazing moments, some incredible milestones where we just did things that no other company had done in technology at the time. And I think you can still look back and there's still a vibrant community of Newton users using the product today, which is incredible. It really broke the sound barrier, and the engineers, I think, got a lot of positive recognition for that. And there were a lot of heroic days. There were also a lot of tough days. There were days of just exhaustion and depression and frustration that maybe the world didn't see the future that we had planned for the product as clearly as we did. So there were ups and downs. I think Newton's an important chapter in the development of consumer technology. Going from the personal computer to the PDA to now the smartphone and tablet. And we're not done, right? I think, mixed reality, augmented reality around the corner, Newton played a small but important step in that process. So I would, continue to be really proud to have had the benefit of working with those people and working on those products.
You presented something at the Worldwide Newton Conference at some point, didn't you? Did you ever attend one of those?
I did. Walter Smith and I showed up. Yeah, we did a little fireside chat.
Was it everything you dreamed it would be?
I didn't know what to expect. I mean, this was long after the product was, no longer, supported by Apple. I think I was blown away at the amount of engineering, crowdsourced engineering that has happened to reverse engineer a lot of the Newton OS, to port it to Linux and other hardware devices, and it just really touched me that there's that much energy, and it's a testament to what has happened with the internet, that like-minded people can organize so effectively, and through that the Newton can live on. It was really cool.
Very cool.
I think the integration of hardware and software in the Newton, something Apple's, again, known for today. But if you compare the Macintosh, the original Macintosh hardware-software integration to the level that the Newton brought, I think the Newton really took it up a step function. Again, much closer to what we see today with the iPhone. I think the customer experience around designing this very, very thin layer of user interface that is almost invisible. You can just start writing. You can draw a line across the notepad, and it creates a separator and automatically time and date stamps your note. I mean, those were simple but powerful things, right? And that frame store that I mentioned, the fact that there's no folder and file system on the Newton, if you just take that concept back to 1992, it's unthinkable to not have a folder hierarchy. And we did that and delivered that, and I think it's really incredible. And again, mobile operating systems are still trying to catch up to that today. I mean, the first thing I should say is how amazing Doug Manuel is. He essentially embedded the way a photojournalist would embed in a war zone. He embedded in the technology zone of the Newton. And for, I think, a period of 2 years, he became invisible. Mm-hmm. He was with us around the globe as we were building and launching the Newton, including post-US launch when we launched in the UK, when we launched our French and German versions of the Newton, and he just became part of the team. So it was an incredible gift that he documented, this time of work life. And for me, work and life were the same thing. I mean, I was sleeping in the office. A lot of folks it was just round the clock. This particular photo is prepping for the Newton launch that we did in Chicago. So May 1992. This is on the heels of John Scully's January announcement. This is where we were actually. It was an invite-only announcement. We licensed a series of Star Trek images for the press invite that had, Kirk and Spock talking on their communicators and their tricorders as kind of a teaser for what we were going to show. And it was the first time that invited press could actually see the product that we were building.
Okay, cool. And did they get to try it also? Was this when they were tethered to the Max?
These were still partially tethered.
Okay.
And we had a device we called the bun warmer. Mm-hmm. You may have heard about the bun warmer, but it wasn't an emulator. So the hardware was the Newton hardware, the ARM processor, the motherboard, the Newton screen and touch screen. But in terms of power and heat, it hadn't been optimized yet. So it was in this plexiglass thing that got so warm you could, put a cup of coffee on it, or keep your sandwich warm. Thus the name bun warmer. Mm-hmm. And so we were if I remember correctly, at that stage. But we had the front facade of the message pad on top of the screen, so you could put a camera above it, and it looked and worked like the final, first product looked and worked. The software was very beta. I think the biggest and scariest push for this event was just how unstable the software was, because we were swinging from a vine in the jungle, 1,000 feet above the canopy, trying to grab the next vine, right? And so we were still adding features. And at the same time, we were trying to stabilize the features that were in there.
Right. Every time you add something new, it could destabilize.
It could destabilize, exactly.
Sure. Yeah.
So it was a very stressful time.
Cool.
Paris.
So this is obviously on stage.
So this is the dress rehearsal for the keynote at essentially the Macworld of France. Mm-hmm. And it was the conference center is in the La Défense section of Paris. Mm-hmm. I can't remember the name of the event. It might be in the copy. But the new CEO of Apple, Michael Spindler, was delivering the keynote, and he asked the Newton team to provide a demo as part of his keynote. And I can't remember why it ended up being me. I'm sure my boss, Chow, must have had some conflict or something.
Okay.
But the task fell to me. And Michael and I, in the early days of the Newton, were the two people that could reliably demonstrate the Newton on stage with no handwriting recognition errors.
Really?
Yeah, I remember some people called me Cool Hand Luke because I could just do that demo and it was just the same every time.
Okay.
And you know, and the same every time is a huge feature when it comes to marketing demos, right? So along with a member of our developer tech support team, we flew to Paris and we had to prep and demonstrate Newton. And it was the first time we were showing the product in the wild in Europe. So it was a big deal for all of the European press to actually, you know, see the Newton on stage.
Cool. In the French version, there's actually a bunch of fans of the Newton in France. And I talked to them with my terrible French too, and we were keeping in touch about the Newton. So it's interesting that that you're able to do something that was international, that had to do with handwriting.
Yes, yeah.
So that was also, it seems like you're heaping more of a challenge.
Some might say we're stacking risk.
Stacking risk, there you go.
Yeah, we did French, German, and we did Japanese, katakana.
Did you actually finish the Japanese?
Hey, muzakashi desu. Our partners were Sharp, Toshiba, and Matsushita. Sharp was our manufacturing partner, and Sharp, Toshiba, and Matsushita all had committed to launching their own hardware products with the Newton operating system. And this is another weird, significant moment in time where Apple was licensing an operating system to other hardware companies in 1992. Another thing that's kind of forgotten in the history of technology. And Motorola and Siemens were also licensees. Most of those products never shipped, but as the person that was product manager for the operating system, I did a lot of trips to Tokyo, and I can tell you there was an enormous amount of hardware and software development. So they came close to shipping, and the Sharp product shipped.
There was the Motorola Marco, I think.
That's right. That's right. And Siemens shipped a smart PBX office phone.
Okay.
If you're familiar with like when an ad agency creates like mood boards or inspiration boards, we took over an entire conference room and filled it with imagery and sketches and interior design mock-ups, industrial design mock-ups, all around figuring out what the hell is this brand going to mean, what's it going to look like, what's the product going to look like, but also what's the creative and the packaging and the logo. And all of that came together in this one, think tank room. It was incredible. One of the many great things I learned at Apple is that you sweat every detail.
Yeah, for sure.
You've earmarked my favorite photo in Defying Gravity.
This one here?
This one here.
Okay.
So this is after the Spindler keynote and the Newton demo that I did on stage in front of a huge number of French-speaking fans.
In French too?
No, I attempted one sentence in French, rather poorly, but I think I stumbled through it. I did a map demo showing how you could bring up maps of Paris on the Newton. Remember, this is before the internet.
Yeah.
This is pretty revolutionary that you could put in a little memory card and load information. Imagine loading Google Maps and Yelp for your city, right, on your Newton. And I was also incredibly, jet lagged and exhausted from that demo. And Doug Menuet said, he called me JJ. He said, "Hey JJ, let's go take some pictures of the Newton," because this is again pre-release hardware. Had never been in Europe before. He wanted to go, take some pictures of the Newton in front of, the Eiffel Tower or something like that. Mm-hmm. And so he and I jumped in a taxi. And I jumped in the back seat, and he said, "Hey, I'm gonna jump in the passenger seat." And we're just talking, and I'm just exhausted, and saying, "I'm glad that everything worked, and that the demo's over." And the taxi driver's taking us to wherever we were going, and I couldn't see this. I'm looking through the windshield, but Doug is looking at me and he sees the Arc de Triomphe come up in the rear windshield, and without saying anything, he just grabs his camera and he starts shooting.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, that was the moment that he captured in that photo.
Cool.
Which, I just thought was a great reportage photography moment.
Sure.
And it just captured, I think, the exhaustion and the elation that I had from just getting that demo done.
Mm-hmm.
The one sad thing about this book is that it misses so many amazing Newton team members.
Yeah.
I think the marketing team gets more than their fair share of airtime because we were the ones traveling, doing all these demos and negotiating deals with partners, and that's such rich storytelling for the book. You can get only so many photos of engineers in cubicles writing code, but I think they're the unsung heroes of Newton because they really built the technology. But certainly, Steve Capps, Walter Smith are in here. But there's another 100 people beyond that or more that were just instrumental in making the product. So this was, it was earlier and later, if that makes any sense, that, the Newton team started out with a tablet first. I've heard stories that the same thing happened with the iPhone, that team was way after my time, but they started with a tablet first. And then switched to a smaller device. But in the case of Newton, we had a lot of work done on a large screen device, and then started working in parallel to create a smaller, lower price point device. John Scully issued the mandate that it had to fit inside a men's suit pocket, that inside vest pocket. And at one point, we went to Men's Warehouse and we bought like half a dozen suits, trying to find the largest pocket we could possibly find to figure out what those dimensions would be. But I think there was some disagreement and some politicking, but ultimately the idea of shipping a small format Newton, what we codenamed the Junior, was the winner, and that's what we focused on. But after we shipped it, we then resurrected some of the work and refreshed some of the work to do a larger screen Newton. This one was codenamed Cadillac. It has a tethered stylus, so the stylus actually, connects to the device. I mentioned this before, but it had this technology around diffuse infrared. The idea was that if we all came into a conference room together with our Newton tablets, we would just instantly make a wireless network that we would share. Now today that sounds silly because we live in a world of Wi-Fi, but you have to roll the clock back 24 years and think how profound that would have been. Now again, this was a research technology that just was not ready for prime time. This product never shipped, as you know, but it got pretty far along.
It's a good looking product too.
The industrial design is beautiful. I believe we used a famous Italian industrial designer who had designed Italian sports cars.
Okay, so it's expensive industrial design.
Well, that's not a big expense if you can amortize it across millions of hardware products.
Of course.
But only the best for Apple.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, and I don't quite remember the timing, but this was the second attempt at a Newton tablet, codenamed BIC. What I remember was a strong focus on enterprise usage. And again, these were for verticals like medical or manufacturing, delivery, maintenance, etc. The product had, you'll see on this side, 2 PCMCIA slots. This one had a wireless stylus and a much larger screen than the Cadillac that I showed you. Also, much more battery life. It's bigger and heavier with a much bigger battery.
It's almost like a little paved duo.
Yeah. And a fancy leather case. So again, I was working on the developer tools, and I managed, I think at that time, a 3 or 4 person team within the product marketing organization for the operating system, the developer tools, and the connectivity software that would synchronize your Newton with your Mac or your PC. Most of the work that I did relating to these was with our operating system partners, working with a Sharp, a Matsushita. These were templates, if you will, to demonstrate what our partners could do in terms of extending the form factor.
Okay.
And I think, that's part of the reason they never shipped. I think the other part is that we could never answer the question, why Newton versus a laptop, when you got to a price point and a size and a weight that started to look like a laptop.
I heard there was almost a Mac tablet also.
I think there were multiple times where different Mac groups were working on things that were quasi-competitive to the Newton.
Right.
I think that's a healthy part of Apple's culture, is that there's that competition externally, but there's also competition within.
Okay.
Oh, do you know about the typo in the first edition of that book?
No.
Can I see the spine on the side of yours? Oh, you have it.
I have the first edition.
Oh, you have the first edition.
Okay, and what's the typo?
So let's just look here first. The name of this book is, of course, an Isaac Newton reference,
Right.
Defying Gravity. You'll notice that gravity is spelled Gravity.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine the author's dismay when the jackets came back from the printer and the spine has 2 eyes in gravity.
Of course, yeah, I never even noticed.
Perhaps a visual metaphor for stacking risk?